Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for investing your time with us today. My name is Dan J. Montesran, Community Organizer for the Mott Haven Community Partnership, and I'll be facilitating today's panel discussion. We all understand the importance of civic engagement and the responsibility we have with voting coming up so soon. We're now only 12 days away from November 3rd. This is why today we will have a discussion on racial equity and fostering an inclusive democracy through civic participation, where we will be discussing civic engagement, how it looks like, and how it impacts our community and democracy. But before we dive into panel introductions, I want to make sure everyone is doing good. So, did you guys all eat breakfast today? How's everyone doing today? Is this your fourth, third, fifth Zoom meeting today? If it is, I could relate to that because I got up at 8 a.m. today and I had my first Zoom call at 8:30 in the morning. So I could relate to that for sure. So now our goal today is to make sure that whatever you do in the community, whether you work for a nonprofit, you work for a church, or you work for a community center, that you leave this room knowing how you can, motivate your residents or the clients that you work with to be civically engaged. We want to make sure that everyone leaves this room with a new idea, with a fresh perspective on things that they could do to get the community civically engaged and motivated to vote on November 3rd. But whatever you do in the area and your community, just remember that our goal is not to influence the decision of who they vote for, but rather to make sure that they are civically engaged in this upcoming election. So thank you for joining us today. And now I'm going to go ahead and read the rules for today's panel discussion. So whenever the panelists are speaking, we ask you to make sure that you mute your phone to make sure, that you do not interject yourself. If you have any questions, we will have, towards the end of the panel discussion, we will open the room for questions and you can either enter your questions in the box or you can, turn on your mic. But whatever it is that you do, we ask you that you do it respectfully and that you ask our panelists your questions, knowing that they're not experts, but they're here to be facilitating today's conversation and to make sure that our residents get civically engaged. So once again, thank you for joining us today, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. So first, we have Diana Rodriguez from Eastside House. Diana, can you please introduce yourself?
Here in Mott Haven, so it's super special to me. I currently work for Eastside House Settlement for the past 8 years. And currently I am the Director of Government Relations, really advocating for policies and issues impacting our communities and our children. And a little bit about Eastside House has been in existence since 1891, been in Mott Haven since 1962-63. And I like to say we operate from twinkle to wrinkle because our youngest is 2.5 and our oldest is 99 years old. So a little bit of everything for the Mott Haven community, providing wraparound services with a key focus on education and workforce at the core.
Thank you, Diana. Now we have Bharati Sukul from the Bharati Foundation.
Hi everyone, or namaste. Greetings to all of you. It's a beautiful day to see so many different faces. As mentioned, my name is Bharati Sukul Kemraj, and I came to the borough of the Bronx in 1991 at 7 years old, and I've been here ever since. My dad is the founder of the Vishnu Mandir Hindu temple. We've been a staple in the Soundview section for over 24 years. Unfortunately, my dad passed away 1 year and 8 months ago, and we were blessed to have our street co-named after him, making him the first Guyanese Hindu priest to have a New York City street named after him. So for all of our black, brown, and whatever color and shades you come in, I think that was historic in itself. I work for Patrick B. Jenkins and Associates, a lobbyist consultant firm. Prior to that, I worked with the Bronx Borough President's Office, BronxNet Television, Bronx Community Board 11. So I've done it from bottom up. I know I've had the best of both worlds. So you can't tell me I know one and don't know the other. And aside from that, I am heavily involved with the Bharati Foundation, which was established to connect resources to those in need. So I do community events ranging, like Diana said, from twinkle to wrinkle, everything from the autism spectrum to senior events to awareness events, anything and everything that we can get our community engaged and active in. I'm involved. So it is a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to having this amazing discussion with all of you.
Thank you, Bharati. Now we have Johanna Fernandez, Professor Johanna Fernandez from Baruch College.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation. I am a professor of history at Baruch College of the City University of New York. I teach 20th century U.S. history and the history of social movements. I just finished a book, which is now out, on the Young Lords, a history of the Young Lords, the Puerto Rican counterpart of the Black Panther Party, active here in New York and responsible for many, many things that folks don't know about, including anti-lead poisoning legislation and the first known draft of a patient Bill of Rights, following the occupation of this militant organization by this militant organization of Lincoln Hospital. You probably know Lincoln Hospital. They occupied Lincoln Hospital in 1970. And we're part of that decade of great dreams. I do a lot of work around criminal justice and abolition. I made a film titled Justice on Trial, the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, on the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, an imprisoned radio journalist, former Black Panther, who's still in prison, political prisoner. And I've been involved in all kinds of issues on the ground, from education to issues of health, the struggle for human liberation, really. And that's really my commitment. I consider myself a radical and an anti-capitalist. Radical means someone who addresses the root causes of social problems. And I'm currently teaching a class at Mayday Space for the community titled Class, Race, and Revolution. And I think that's how I was connected to this meeting. I'm happy to have this conversation today. It's a moment that is calling on all of us to fight for something larger than ourselves. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Professor Fernandez. And last but not least, we have founding principal of Capital Pt.1 Charter School, Isaiah Brown.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm humbled and honored to be here with such esteemed colleagues. My name is Isaiah Brown. I am the founding principal of the Capital Bronx Charter School. We're a brand new charter school in the Bronx, the Northern Bronx Co-op City section. I'm a Bronx guy, born and bred, high school, college, living still in the Bronx, Concourse Village. So, you know, I'm proud to be here and definitely interested in adding to the value of the conversations that we're having amongst each other as a community. My charter school in the Bronx is a middle school, started this year with 6th and 7th grade, and we'll be adding a grade on every year until we're a full middle and high school. So again, bringing education to the Bronx, quality education in the Bronx is my mission and vision of what it is that we are doing as a collective. So thank you for inviting me, and super excited to get started with the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Principal Brown. So guys, we're going to go ahead and get started now. So we're going to start with the hardest question. Are you guys all registered to vote? Is everyone registered? And if you haven't, what are you waiting for? So if there's anyone who needs help, you know, learning or knowing how to register, please contact Carlos Roman. He's done it before. And how long did it take you, Carlos, to register?
It only takes about 5 minutes if you don't know what you're doing.
5 minutes, guys. 5 minutes. And we only have 12 days before the election. So please make sure you're registered to vote. So we're going to go ahead and get started.
For me, I think it's important that we highlight, again, as a community of color, right? This is what we're discussing, our community of color, that we, as the folks who engage the community, as the folks who are from the community, start the conversations and also start the movements and the actions that are going to push us up from where we're at right now as a community. I think right now, as far as civic engagement is concerned, there's a need for it, and then there is also a lack of it, and that comes for many reasons. And I think that right now in society where we're at, as we are facing two prominent issues that are dominating our societies and our communities right now, which are a pandemic, right? That's a real thing that's going on in the moment. And also the social inequities that we see on a daily basis. And specifically what's been highlighting is the social inequities as far as policing in our communities. I think that for the summer and in the springtime, the events that occurred during those times really highlighted the need for having positive connections and positive interactions and relationships among folks who live in the community, who reside in the community, especially, again, communities of color and those folks who are keeping us safe, right? And I think that there's a disconnect. And the disconnect, I feel, can be filled, filled in the gaps in between with the communication, with the engagement, right, civically, that we're talking about. And that manifests itself in a variety of ways. But I think that if we start the conversation with what is it that we want to engage our communities with civically, and then from there, who's going to support us in meeting that goal, I think that that's like really the foundation of where our civic engagement meets our communities, and then we can start to see some change that goes on.
Thank you, Principal Brown.
Sure, and just to jump in also, I mean, why it's an issue, the fact being that it's such a powerful tool to be civically engaged and be able to use that, you know, your voice for power to create change. That could be anything from advocating to voting, participating in the census, organizing, protesting. But for a lot of people, this is a tool of fear, and that's how it's used, you know, especially in the Mott Haven communities where we see high number, a disproportionate amount of arrests. We also see a high number of undocumented families, and they feel like they can't speak up and they can't be engaged on issues because, you know, what are the consequences to that afterwards?
Thank you, Diana.
To add to that, I think civic engagement, you know, it is a racial equity issue, because if you look at it, you break it down, racial equity is about applying a certain justice system or a behavior or treatment, if we really think about it, and a little bit or a lot of common sense, depending on the way you look at certain things, to a system that is out of balance, that is not fair to everyone, every community. And despite it affecting the Black and Brown and certain low-income families, ultimately, I think we all pay the price. It affects every single one of us because it either trickles down or from bottom up. And I think civic engagement, you know, it has a huge role to play when it comes to racial equity, and especially in our community, especially in the borough of the Bronx.
First of all, I want to say that I'm from the Bronx too. That's something that I failed to say. I mean, I grew up in the Bronx on the Grand Concourse. So I think that civic engagement is first and foremost a human relationship to the world around us. And ultimately, it's an existential question like, who am I? And what's my relationship to my family? What's my relationship to the community, to the country, and to the world? The question of civic engagement helps us become full human beings, which is ultimately central to living if we want to lead a value-filled life. Unfortunately, we live in a society that depends on the absence of our participation for the people on top of society to remain fat cats. And in fact, the way our society is ordered, which depends on our lack of participation organically and fully in our society, produces an enormous amount of mental illness and disconnection and feelings of purposelessness, right? But then there's the issue of race. And essentially, this society, and in fact, the whole institution of capitalism, was built on the enslavement of Africans, the genocide of Native Americans, and the colonization of people from Mexico and Puerto Rico and other people of color. So there's an inbuilt feature of inequality that's just our daily bread. And what we see and we know is that everything we take for granted today, the fact, for example, that I'm a professor as a Black woman, I'm also Dominican at Baruch College, that you have teachers who are people of color, that we're even employed as people of color. This is a product of struggle. Without struggle, and pressing the boundaries of oppression and saying, hold up, I'm gonna stand up and fight for what's right and for my humanity and dignity, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So our survival really depends on robust engagement. And I'm not talking about voting alone, because voting is in fact a very passive kind of civic engagement. The question is, what do we do after we cast the vote? And if you look at history, significant change has only happened through militant action in the streets. It took a civil rights movement, and it took strikes in the 1930s for this thing called the minimum wage and the 8-hour day, and integration, although we are not a very integrated society, to even be in the conversation. So change happens, and we're seeing it today. Change happens when people really collectively take the reins of history and speak truth to power. If people would not have hit the streets after the murder of Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we wouldn't really be having a robust conversation about police violence. It took literally riots in Minneapolis and the burning down of a police precinct, because unfortunately in this country, the riot is the only language that America listens to when it comes to Black oppression. It took that level of decision on the part of ordinary people that this is the place where my oppression stops, and we're going to take history into our own hands. So I think that civic participation is necessary for our survival, but also for our humanity as people of color.
Thank you, Professor Fernandez. So we're going to move on into the following question, which is a follow-up question to the previous question. So what is our role as community members, nonprofits, in encouraging civic engagement with the families we work with?
For me, as a school leader whose school is founded off of social justice, it's important for me to educate young folks on what it is that they are going to be navigating as they get older in life. The social inequities that Ms. Fernandez spoke about, many of the ills that are systemically affecting us as a community, that is making the community or creating the environments, right, that are leading to our communities being less than desirable for us, right? And I'm not talking about for other people looking in, I'm talking about for us, the things that we want to see in our communities. And that change, right, that change starts with us. And for me, as an educator, as a school leader, it's my responsibility really to educate our young people on how to speak, right, their truth into change, how to speak their feelings, their thoughts, their emotions, all of the things that they see as every day, waking up, going to school, as we all did when we grew up, right? With the things that they see around them, the environment that they see around them, that they say, hey, you know what, I wish this looked a different way, or I wish we interacted with each other in a different way, right? We can't change that. And it's difficult to see that as an adult versus as a child, right? And a lot of it is the support that we as educators, right, I'm speaking about me and my staff here, do every day to make sure that our scholars understand and they know that the change starts with you, and we're here as adults to support you so that we can create the change that occurs in our community. And it can only be in that collaborative fashion that we enact change in our community. And that's where I think for us, it starts in our school. For me as a school leader, that's something that I'm passionate about. And without the guidance of an adult, right, of a person who has already walked the walk, who has experienced many of the items that our scholars are experiencing right now, it is upon our shoulders to guide them, to illuminate that way for them so that they can be the agents of change in their community. So in short, to answer the question, that responsibility does fall for me on myself as the leader of the school, and also my illuminators. We call our teachers illuminators, our illuminators, to support our young people with that passion and that growth for the change that they want to see in their communities.
Thank you, Professor Brown.
Speaking from an individual point of view and as part of the community and nonprofit sector, for me, it's so important to engage everyone. And I keep in mind that a lot of these families, like my own, came from somewhere else, and they may or may not know what it is to do certain things. So we go back to the basics of the who, who, what, where, when. Just teaching them all over again, this is important, why it's important. And I think through every program, every event, activity, seminar that we've hosted, we encourage the families and we tell them what they can do to get involved, what they should do, because your voice is important. It's important to use it. It's important to utilize others who have the same mission as you, who has the same need. And I think you see strength not only in numbers, because you can have 100 people that are just standing there. You can have 100 people that are voicing their opinions. And I think when you put those words to paper and you get active and you find out the needs of not only your family, but those around you, it's very powerful. So from the work we do, we try to teach everyone how to get involved and the importance of being involved, because a lot of them, including, again, my family, you come from certain governments, certain societies, certain cultures, that just tells you, work, be happy, stay home, don't get involved with government, don't get involved with police, don't be too active because there could be backlash. So for the communities that are in need, that need resources, that need jobs, that need to be active because of things that are happening around them that they're seeing every day, we truly, truly try to encourage everyone to get as active and tell them how they can get involved when it comes to their civic duties.
Thank you, Bharati.
And just like Bharati was sharing, I think very similar, is providing that safe space to really empower the families. So that way, they're able to share out what are some things that they want to know about, what are the questions that they have, the issues that they're concerned about. So that way you're really able to connect them with what they need, or sometimes just a space to say, this is how I'm feeling today, or this is the inequity that I did experience. And we hear that a lot, especially being a settlement house and, in the community. And they, a lot of our families also don't just want these one-offs, they want these deep-rooted relationships with people. So that way they're able to connect on multiple levels. And we know that it's not just the parent, it's the child, it's the grandparent, that all need these kind of services and need this ear and boots on the ground as well.
Thank you, Johanna.
So this is a challenging question because we live in a society that literally works people to death. And a lot of people don't have time to ask these questions. I mean, we're privileged, especially those of us who had higher education. We've had the luxury of asking larger questions. So I think that you, as an organization, are in a position potentially to provide some families with a level of stability that perhaps allows families and members within a family to look beyond survival, right? To ask these questions about our society and how can we make it better, and why should I engage in civic projects. From the perspective of the university and my students, and just people generally, I think that it's important to acknowledge that we're all injured birds in this society as people of color, because we're, ultimately, regardless of our degrees, perceived as children of a lesser God. And, every time we see trauma in the streets, like the killing of an innocent person by the cops, that injures our soul, that injures the little child in us in ways that we don't talk about. And that follows us throughout our lives in unconscious ways. And what I try to do in my classroom is to be the teacher that I didn't have, to be the professor that I didn't have and expect the best of my students and treat them as fully capable intellectual beings. And then expose them to the incredible history of struggle, mostly of Black Americans in this country and many others, Puerto Ricans for sure. I mean, I'm Dominican, and Dominicans are taught to deny their Blackness. And I teach the history of Black Americans in this country, which is a history that you have to literally take your hat off to. So really exposure to the courage and badassness of people who've been historically oppressed in this country. And that's what we should aspire to. And that is a legacy of taking the bull by the horn and ensuring that our communities survive.
Thank you, Professor Fernandez. So guys, before we move on into the following question, so just real quick, so what does civic engagement look like? Like when you think of it, like what does it look like?
Different for each and everyone, kind of like our shoes, you know. There's no perfect size when it comes to civic engagement, because what might be right for me or to my cultural background might not be right for someone else. And I think if someone, you know, showed me another way of doing things instead of being disrespected, I probably would follow it. Maybe it's simpler or easier, maybe it's harder. You know, they always say if everyone was alike in the world, it'd be so boring, right? So I think for everyone, it's different. For the work we do, it means being out there. When the pandemic hit, you know, we spent a couple of months being at home from March, and then June, we kicked off food giveaway. Our first food giveaway had almost 600 people, and they came and got groceries for about a week to a month's worth of products, where they were walking away with 2 filled carts of just free grocery, and that alone helped them. And for us, that was getting volunteers out, getting the fraternity and sorority brothers and sisters out with us, getting the elected officials to come out. Basically, like you know, our other panelists have said, it's our human duty to make sure that those around us are happy, healthy, and safe in any way, shape, and form. And I think for us, the civic duty looks like giving back to our community, making sure that they have food on the table during this pandemic. And that's just one example. So truly, I personally think that it's different from everyone's point of view and depending on the work they do.
Thank you, Bharati.
I agree. I do feel there is no one size fits all for civic engagement. I do feel that there are certain elements in there that are just you know, you can use just across any types of civic engagement activity that you are engaging yourself with. Advocacy's got to be the #1 thing out there, right? You got to be able to speak up. You got to be able to express yourself, express your concerns, express your notices and wonderings, right? That's the language that we use in our school. And it's important that we have that voice. But as Ms. Fernandez said earlier, you know, we've been disenfranchised. We've been silenced. So to the point where it feels like many, you know, even within our community, throughout the different generations that are in our community, it feels like, you know, from the older generation, it's more of, you know, stay straight, mind your business, do your thing, just go to work every day and your life will be okay. You won't have to worry about certain systemic issues, but not really realizing that, yeah, we do, you know, and it is something that we just can't run from or hide from or turn the other way from. There has to be some way in which that we as a people start to advocate for ourselves, right? Start to speak up and express our opinions and our thoughts about items that are occurring in our communities. And there also has to be a platform for that. The best thing about social media, right? Social media is a gift and a curse. A great thing about social media is it does provide you that platform. It provides platforms for folks to come out and speak their minds and in sort of a pseudo safe space. But again, it is very difficult right now because of such because of the history of advocacy and the history of civic engagement in our country, and also in our city, right? It's also the same thing, where it's now to the point where the new generation, not even the millennials, but the social media age generation now feels as if the only way they can get their message across is through this vessel right here. And as we are noticing and as we are seeing and experiencing throughout the summertime and even up to now, the protests that are going on in our communities are not really protesters from my age group or an older age group. It really is from the youth. The youth are coming out and saying, we are tired of this. Our parents had to endure this. Our grandparents had to endure this. And the buck's got to stop somewhere. And they're saying that it's going to stop here. I think the key is for us to, in whatever avenue that we want to engage our communities in, that we do it in a collaborative fashion so that people can see a united front, so that there are no ways in which the Proud Boys can infiltrate our protests or our marches or our rallies, right? We have to be unified in our message and unified in our numbers, so that now when we go out and engage the community, the look feels as if it's more united. There are more of us involved. We're here to get this thing going. But, you know, as Ms. Fernandez said, this has happened already, right? We've done this, and this the only way that we were able to even make change happen in our communities is because we're standing united and forcing it to happen. So I think that, you know, again, as you mentioned, there are just many ways in which we can do this, which we can engage our community in a civic fashion. It's just which way is going to work for whichever nonprofit is working with this whole thing, which whatever community that we're in, or whatever the issue is that we're speaking about at the time. So again, there's no one size fits all, but there are elements that have to remain consistent in order for the engagement to be impactful in the community.
And just real quick, Principal Brown, since you mentioned, you know, social media, just in case, you know, anybody wants to know, there are around 6,000 tweets per second, meaning, you know, 350 tweets per minute, 500 million tweets per day, and around 200 billion tweets per year. Since you're talking about social media, you know, anyone who wants to be civically engaged and wants to use social media, I think it also comes down to how they use it, how they utilize, you know, their social media, especially if you have a lot of followers. Even if you have, you know, 5 followers, like right now, for example, the Mott Haven Community Partnership, we have 600 followers. So we might, you know, we try to make sure that anything that we post is not so much, you know, telling people who to vote for, but rather, you know, to be involved, to be informed, and to know, like, when are important deadlines, you know, like, when are they happening, and what do they have to do in order to be able to be a part of it, but not so much, you know, making a decision for them. So thank you for making your point about social media. And I think Johanna wanted to make a comment.